Episode 133 of the Nerd Byword sees Dave and myself pitching our own comic book ideas. The Byword begins now. Welcome into another all-inclusive episode of the Nerd Byword. On today's Byword Big Talk, we're going to be each giving our 3 comic book pitches for the Big 2. But first, we start every episode with...
Nerd News!
And this week's Nerd News is exclusively trailer reactions. Dave, what's on the pipe for you?
Well, I think we're definitely going to have to talk about the most recent trailer released, and that is Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Now, as of this recording, this trailer just dropped a couple of days ago, and I have been an incredibly vocal naysayer about going back to the well of Indiana Jones, especially considering how underwhelming and disappointing in many ways Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was. However, I'm not gonna lie, guys. I saw this trailer and it did kind of get me hyped for the new Indiana Jones. And I know. One of the big criticisms, of course, Harrison Ford is ancient at this point and maybe a little bit too old to play Indiana Jones again and do all that swashbuckling, especially considering how much they leaned in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull already on how old he was, and now we're much further along even than that. But at the same time, there is a vibe in the trailer that if it is captured by the movie, it feels significantly more like Indiana Jones than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull did. There's also the added benefit of Phoebe Waller-Bridge in the cast as Indiana Jones' goddaughter, which I think is also an extremely interesting sort of way of doing a next generation thing that they did very, very poorly in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. There's a very, very cool shot of Uncanny Valley Harrison Ford where they have de-aged him that looks absolutely perfect. And considering how critical I have been of the whole Mark Hamill de-aging stuff that they have done in Disney shows, it kind of blows my mind that this particular shot looks so good, like to the point where, if the technology is that good, I'd like to know how expensive it is, guys, because let's just de-age him for a whole movie and go full Raiders, because that looked incredible. There is just a lot of vibes, I guess, in this trailer. It doesn't reveal too much about the story, but it's all vibes, man, and it feels like Raiders. It feels like The Last Crusade. It feels right as far as an Indiana Jones movie goes. So either the movie is really promising, or the editor of the teaser trailer is an absolute genius. I do not know. This could come out and be complete trash again, but the teaser trailer so far has actually kind of gotten me excited about this movie, Chris.
Yeah, I've referenced this meme before, but I'm Michael Corleone in Godfather Part 3. Just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in. And that's exactly how I feel. I mean, I can't quite put it into words. Like you said, it's just vibes. Like the overall vibe just feels right. And I think so much about what went wrong with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is something that we've criticized in other film adaptations. Is just being a product of its time, and Shia LaBeouf was riding high off of Transformers and things of that nature, and he's fallen from grace, of course, since then. But like at that time in 2008 or 9 or whenever that film came out, he was like one of the leading men of Hollywood, and so they tried to capitalize on that. And then I think when you try and do that just because that's what they do, I think it falls flat. And for so many reasons, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was just hollow, and you could see right through it. It was like, you're behind the curtain and the Wizard of Oz is revealed within the first few minutes of the film. It just did not land. But I can't quite put it into words. It's a minute and a half worth of footage. Who knows what it is, but it just feels right this time around.
Yeah, it really does, and I'm psyched. I really hope, considering this is most likely going to be the last hurrah for Indiana Jones. Especially considering that there's been a lot of talk out of Disney that they're not interested in recasting, and Harrison Ford's getting kind of long in the tooth. This is probably Harrison Ford's and the character's victory lap in a lot of ways. And so, I think it's probably worth punting back for a second and just, mentioning that Indiana Jones, I think even almost more so than something like Star Wars, really captured my imagination as a kid. It is, I think, to me, the pinnacle of what George Lucas was doing early in his career, which was trying to bring back and modernize the type of adventure storytelling that was so common in like the serials of the 30s and 40s, and so I love those old serials. I love the swashbuckling adventureness of it all. I think that's why Star Wars landed so well, particularly the original movie Star Wars, what's commonly referred to as A New Hope these days. And as Star Wars sort of developed away a little bit from its serial roots in a lot of ways, Indiana Jones stayed, dug in, and kept doing that sort of swashbuckling storytelling. So even Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, as weak as that movie was, and as much as there was wrong with that movie, it still felt like that kind of storytelling. And so for that alone, I really loved it. I think there is a vacuum, I think, in modern storytelling. We have become very serious, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Everything has to be grounded and gritty.
Yes, yep. Yes. And so that swashbuckling, let's go punch some Nazis on a train, like, I miss that, I love that. And it makes me a little bit sad that, at least for the time being, this is probably going to be the last go around for the character. But more so, I think, for that type of storytelling, because it has gone out of fashion again. And I wish there was a George Lucas type who loves that kind of old-fashioned storytelling and is willing to kind of update it again and bring it back. The problem, of course, is, Lucas consumed some of that stuff in his own youth and appreciated and loved it. But how many people, in the age of peak TV and streaming and everything, is sitting around and watching old, serialized storytelling from the 30s and 40s? So this is going to be, this is probably going to go the way of the dodo here pretty soon. And Indiana Jones feels in a lot of way like sort of the last vestiges of that type of storytelling. And I love it, and I'm going to miss it tremendously.
Well, I'm going to hold out hope, because I was a latecomer to Indiana Jones, but I immediately fell in love with it. As someone who loves, romanticist literature like Alexander Dumas and that swashbuckling D'Artagnan. I love Zorro for all the same reasons. And I'm right there with you, because like everything does not have to be gritty and real and grounded. For the most part, I come to media, irrespective of what type of media, for escapism. The real world around me is real enough. I'm good. I need some escapism. I need some adventures. I need some swashbuckling. And so that's what immediately latched me on to now a character like Dick Grayson, whose favorite book is the Merry Adventures of Robin Hood. Like, I'm all here for that. And Nightcrawler, that's why I latched on to Kurt, is because he's a swashbuckling romanticist protagonist. And so I'm super excited for this movie, and I hope that it lives up to the hype.
And can I detour for a second, because you said the magic words when it comes to swashbuckling, which is Zorro. What exactly has Antonio Banderas been smoking lately? Did you see that news story that Antonio Banderas would like to come back for another Zorro movie, that he's the old man and he passes on the mantle to Tom Holland? Tom Holland as Zorro?
Oh, I don't know about Tom Holland. I didn't see the Tom Holland part.
Yeah, I will take Antonio Banderas to come back and do another Zorro any day of the week. But why is his hand-picked successor Tom Holland of all people?
I love both of them. It's just no, nope.
Yeah, it's just it seems like a bad match. I mean, if you want to work with Tom Holland, dude, go for it. But Zorro, I made you speechless with the story.
I'm I get the swashbuckling vibes from Holland. I mean, I think that's what makes him a good Spider-Man. But I think it's incredibly tone deaf to cast a whitest of the white actors in that role. And it already comes with whatever of Antonio Banderas being European born and playing a Latine character. In Alejandro Murrieta, but I think it's even more egregious, of course, with Tom Holland.
All right, Kris, let's get off of this story, and you tell me a little bit about your trailer that you'd like to talk about.
All right, so I think we've both seen the Guardians holiday special. It delivered a lot of heart and put Palm Clemente in everything. Holy Lord, she's far and away my favorite Guardian now. But we got the final trailer for Guardians 3 on their last adventure. This is, as I'm understanding correctly, if I'm understanding correctly, this is significant time after Thor has left. So they are once again trying to guard the galaxy. They are actively on their crusade. We get glimpses of the High Evolutionary, and we get a glimpse of Adam Warlock. And I totally believe that Rocket Raccoon is going to die in this film, Dave.
Yeah, I like the early footage. I like the vibe. This is very much it's Guardians of the Galaxy, man. Like it feels like part 1 and 2. It is of the same cloth, and that's got me excited because I love those movies. I'm going to go ahead and say that there's been some statements obviously made on social media by James Gunn. One of the things he mentioned was that this movie is going to be very much Rocket's movie, that he wants to focus in on that character. And, not surprised there. Obviously, it's just a really, really good character, right? But on the same token, I think I have to come out and say that, maybe it is okay to not kill off a character in every movie. Like if this is going to be the last hurrah of these characters, maybe just don't. Like, is that always really necessary? I mean, we lost.
Is that the way you want to leave it? Is that the way you want to leave it? Yeah.
Yeah, we lost original flavor Groot, right? In the first one. And then obviously we lost Yondu in the second one. And let's not even talk about the fact that we lost Gamora then in what was it, Endgame. So I'm not super hyped about the notion of just go ahead and killing off another character as the grand finale of the movie. I'm a sucker for a good happy ending. Like, bring us to the brink, make us think you're doing it, sure. But it is okay to just let these characters ride off into the sunset and leave it at that, So all the speculation of, oh, look, Drax has a hole in him in his chest in one shot of the trailer. Maybe it's Drax dying. Like, that's what everybody's focusing in on, like, who's going to die? And that's not the most interesting thing to me when it comes to this film. The most interesting thing to me by far is that this is going to be the last James Gunn Guardians of the Galaxy movie. And I have a mad love for those characters, and I have a mad love for those movies. I think the first Guardians was still the movie to recapture the feeling that I had watching Star Wars on the big screen, that sense of adventure and fun. And although there is danger, there's just, hey, there's that swashbuckling thing, right? So, this is the end of that, and I think we should lean into the enjoyment of that and enjoying this trailer and this footage, and not just sitting around talking for now the next 5-6 months about who's gonna die. That is not how I want this franchise to occupy my brain space over the next few months. Does that make any sense, man?
I agree with what you're saying. I will say, the costumes, comic accuracy, God, they're gorgeous.
Oh, absolutely. I think the more comic accurate you go, the more fun we end up having, All
right, that wraps up our nerd news segment for this week. When we come back, we've got comic book pitches for the big two. What were your reactions to the Indiana Jones and Guardians 3 trailer? Hit us up on social media at Nerd Byword on Twitter and Instagram. We are now here for our byword. And Dave has been sitting and stewing on this one for a long time, but we each have 3 comic book pitches that we want to see. Dave, what is the first comic book pitch that you have?
All right, so obviously, I've been writing, some comic book stories and stuff. So the pitches that we're going to talk about here are going to not be like personal stories that I'm hoping to one day write or something. These are really like, what would I do if I were at DC Comics? Like, if I had the opportunity to write some DC comic books, like, what would I be into? So if I would go, into corporate comics rather than writing indie short stories as I am right now, what are the things that I want to do at corporate DC, And so my very first one, I think, should be really obvious, is I would want to do a Superman story. Superman is one of my all-time favorite characters. To me, easily the most relatable. But how do you do something quote-unquote new with Superman? Now, I'm not going to say that this is a completely brand new idea. I'm sure that some creators have played with this notion, but I want to go all in on it. So this would be a story where Superman, in a confrontation with Lex Luthor, is robbed of his powers. Lex Luthor is victorious. Superman is no longer super for all intents and purposes. And Lex Luthor is triumphant. And he believes that now that Superman is out of the picture, he is untouchable. In this story, he's still sort of like the legitimate businessman. Nobody really knows that he is a bad guy except for Superman. And so powerless, Superman now sets out to take down Lex Luthor once and for all, not with his superpowers, but with the power of journalism. And so as an investigative journalist, we have sort of an investigation detective story almost, where Superman goes after Lex Luthor with the only power that he has left, which is finding the truth. And so this story would feature very, very little Superman in costume. You remove all the flashiness of the character, the cape, the suit, and you bring him down to his bare essence. What you have is Clark Kent, a good man who wants to do right by people. And so he goes after Lex Luthor and investigates his business dealings, the shady stuff going on behind the scenes. This opens up a lot of interesting commentary, I think, to me, about like corporate practices, corruption within government and within businesses, the relationship between the two, and ultimately, obviously, this is a Superman story. Clark Kent would be victorious in the end in taking down Lex Luthor and restoring his powers. And so you have this quintessential Superman story that really features very little Superman and instead really hones in on the character of Clark Kent and his profession as a journalist, which I think very many writers oftentimes only use Clark being a journalist as window dressing for him to know when something is happening so he can go there, breaking news style. And they don't really dig into the notion that, hey, this is something that he does because he's good at it and because he likes it, is another way of standing for truth. And so I think this would be a really, really fascinating story. Just do like a 12-issue maxi of Superman without powers going after Lex Luthor.
I'm fascinated by this. I immediately think of, All the President's Men or Spotlight and something like that, and using investigative journalism to bring down the big bad adversaries. Like this is fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I think there's something really, really enjoyable about seeing a superhero stripped of their powers and still being able to do good in some way, if that makes sense.
And I think it's in the day and age in which we live, where the media as a result has been heavily distrusted because of idiocy and things of that nature. I think this would be a very, very poignant story to tell.
Yeah, I think so too, man. All right, let's go ahead and go into your first pitch. I feel like you have a lot of bats on your mind right now.
Well, this is coming off of last week's Nerd Commendation in Gotham Knights, and it's something that I really, really enjoyed in a unique aspect. But I'm kind of molding it in a different fashion. So my book is called Children of the Bat, and it's essentially Succession set in Gotham's most famous family tree. Bruce is in the twilight of his life, so he's not dead, because I think him being alive, adds an interesting element into it. But he's in the twilight of his life, and all of his children, biology be damned, have different ideas on what the future should hold. And so you have all of his proteges, all obviously have conflicting ideologies and personalities and motivations. The interactions that I've seen in Gotham Knights between particularly Jason and Dick are fascinating in their different approaches. And then you also have, characters like Tim, like Damian, who's probably one of my disappointments, even though I understand like the complications of why he wasn't included. But the one thing I'm sad about with Gotham Knights is that Damian is not included. And, as someone who is the head of a non-traditional family and believes that family comes in all different shapes and sizes, I think one of the things that kind of rubs me the wrong way is this emphasis on Damian being the biological son and that holding so much power and weight. And I think that that should be amended a little bit in this type of story, where family is so much deeper than bloodlines. And so, like I said in last week's Nerd Commendation, I instantly related to Dick Grayson being like the eldest child and feeling like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders. But how does that conflict with everybody else's opinions and strategies? And you could even, I immediately kind of fuse these together with something like Batman Beyond. So you could even have Terry McGinnis involved in this. I guess it's an alternate universe, but I just think that it would be fascinating to have Bruce still alive and have his input, and yet he's advanced in age, and the next generation is ready to take things on and go in different directions.
Yeah, any story where you remove Bruce Wayne from the equation is obviously going to be interesting. I think Bruce has, in a lot of ways, kind of gotten long in the tooth, I guess is a way of putting it. And people have been, I think, struggling for a while now in figuring out how to do something interesting with the character. And so, doing a thing where you kind of remove him from the equation, I think is really interesting. Obviously, the Bat family has expanded tremendously over the years, and so I think there's a real opportunity there to let some of those other characters shine as soon as you remove Bruce from the equation. I think a great example of this is, of course, Grant Morrison, Frank Quitely, when they did the whole Batman and Robin thing, when Bruce was missing in the time stream, and you have the team of Dick Grayson as Batman and Damian Wayne as Robin. I think a lot of Dick Grayson fans would probably say that Dick should be Nightwing and shouldn't be Batman, but that run was absolutely incredible and showed how you can be Batman and be very different from Bruce Wayne's iteration of the character. So, I kind of like this idea of seeing the larger Bat family dealing with and rising to the occasion of Batman being gone. In fact, one of my own pitches kind of revolves around that idea just a little bit. So obviously we'll get to that.
Which you recommended to me yesterday, that Batman and Robin run by Morrison and Quitely. And oh my God, I started it last night and I can't get enough. Like it's a masterpiece. Like more on that in a future Nerd Commendation. But my God, it's so good.
It really is ridiculously good.
I said it last night on social media, but okay, I'm saving it for the impending Nerd Commendation. It's so good. Just go freaking read it. Dave, you have been sitting on this gold mine for so long, and it's time for you to finally share with the class.
Yeah, I've talked about even how I would make this as a movie. But I think it would also be really, really good as a comic book. You might notice that even my Superman story could almost like work in like a mainline continuity Superman book. But this, I think, it would be sort of separate from main continuity. And the title of the story is Martian PI. So I'm a big Martian Manhunter fan. I love John Jones with a red hot glowing passion, and I think he's one of the great characters that is always underutilized. And every time they try to do a solo outing with him, they don't have a real clear angle on what to do with him. And so those oftentimes, despite great creator efforts, those oftentimes fall flat. So I like the idea of, the Martian civilization obviously has been gone for a long time. The Red Planet has been barren for centuries. So I like the idea of John Jones, the last Martian, hiding out on Earth, away from everybody, away from people, not wanting to interfere with human development. But he's been around for centuries and is just like isolated away and grieving the loss of his family and his civilization. And then loneliness finally gets the better of him, and he starts, interacting slowly with human beings. And eventually, we kind of just like he settles in sort of this like 1950s era as a private detective, and that's really where we join him at the beginning of the story, and we kind of get a sense for how he lost his family and all that stuff, sort of in flashbacks. But the big thing is that we're kind of taking several different genres and throwing them in a blender. We're taking the saucer movies of the 50s, and that sort of aesthetic. So anything like we see in flashbacks of Mars and stuff is very much like 1950s sci-fi, flying saucers and everything. We're blending the very real paranoia of the 1950s with the Red Scare and with McCarthyism. And there's a real sense of paranoia, not just for John Jones, as he's worried about being discovered that he's not actually a human, but also that there's some other aliens, and that's sort of the underlying that are hiding, because they're shapeshifters like he is, and so that's an underlying paranoia. And then sort of those black and white, old school, film noir private eye stories, and we're blending all this together in this like beautiful sci-fi blend of John Jones living as a human, hiding out, working as a PI to help people, still being quote unquote a manhunter after all in some ways, and then getting drawn into a case that actually involves other shape-shifting aliens, which may or may not be other surviving Martians. Yeah, it's the hardest case he's ever had. And we just get this really cool blend of genres and maybe something finally truly distinctive for this totally awesome character. If you want to tie it in with the larger DC universe, you can even say that, there are other superheroes that he kind of bumps into. We have sort of the post-World War II JSA hanging out, but he does not want to, be like them. Maybe he makes some kind of contact with one of them through one of his cases and is eventually persuaded to join them. That is an arc you can add. But that is minor Easter eggy stuff to me. The big thing is I want to take the Martian Manhunter and firmly place him into this 1950s sci-fi film noir vibe and just see what you can do with him in that situation. And I think there is so much you can do with that character in that era. It almost is like when you take like Superman smashes the Klan and this beautiful period piece. I think the Martian Manhunter would thrive in a period piece.
There's so many things to dissect here. Now, first and foremost, as a Thomas Magnum fan, I love the title Martian PI. I think if there is one thing that you and I had to put our money on that we both enjoy, it is detective pieces. Like that is something that we share like to the nth degree. Be it, oh God, just any detective work is just, I'm always here for. I remember when BBC's Sherlock first came out and we were just gushing about how much we loved it and how smart and inventive it was. I love everything about that. And so I'm just totally here for this. It reminds me of one of my previous Nerd Commendations from many moons ago is Roberto Aguirre Sacasa's Nightcrawler. from the early 2000s, where he is essentially a supernatural detective. And, while the circumstances are certainly different, I think the heart of it is there. You have all of the elements necessary for a fantastic detective piece. And just sign me up, and I want it. And I'm pissed that we don't have it right now.
Well, I'll just say DC, I'm available if you'd like to try this one out. All right, Kris. So, what is your second pitch for a comic book?
I'm one of the other aspects of my core interests are family pieces. If you can't tell, my second book is called Darkholme and Adler. Maybe as Marvel is wont to do is to recycle old titles names. We could call it X-Men Blue, pun fully intended. It's a family book centered around Mystique and Destiny and their two children, Rogue and Nightcrawler. What happens when you stop running for your life and face the traumatic events of your past as a family? One of my greatest frustrations is Nightcrawler's parentage and his backstory being retconned in the Draco. For those of you that do not know, Chris Claremont's original plan for Nightcrawler's parentage were for Mystique to take the form of a male and to impregnate Destiny, and that he would be their biological child together. And until I get that retconned and have Kurt officially have two moms, like, I will just rage against the machine. That is Jim Shooter and his homophobia. So I also am frustrated by how neither Destiny or Mystique truly will claim Kurt. You can make all the jokes you want about him, about her tossing him over the waterfall as an infant and everything. But I also see the aspects of, from her perspective as being persecuted as a woman and having to hide him. But I think I finally want them to sit down and have the space to tackle that trauma together. Now that Destiny is finally been resurrected and she is alive again, they can kind of deal with that trauma head on together rather than dance around it or make snide remarks at the Quiet Council meetings. You also have the added bonus of having Gambit now married into the family, and we've gotten morsels of that in, I believe it was Jerry Duggan's X-Men run. That Destiny does not approve of this marriage, even though she was dead when they got married. So we can always unpack that for much needed drama and stuff like that. So I'm all here for a Darkholme Adler family book with Destiny, with Mystique, with Rogue, Nightcrawler, and featuring Gambit, because I'm here for it. And we need to unpack that stuff.
Now, see, as somebody who is not as deeply involved in X-Men lore, I find this whole discussion extremely interesting. I also think it's interesting how you mentioned, like, Mystique taking on the form of a male and then, like, impregnating someone as a male. Because that is actually, I just literally finished reading the entire Invincible run. I don't know if you're familiar with that one. There was a cartoon adaptation recently.
I read the first 10. I read the first 10 issues, and I really, really enjoyed it. I didn't jump back on. I love the show. Love the show.
Yeah, I did. I read the entire 144 issue run recently. With, like, recently being like, I finished it last night. And one of the characters in their Monster Girl is obviously a woman, a girl, and can take on a monster form, which is male. And that is actually a plot point that occurs, spoilers, where she actually, the monster form is male, and in the male form, she impregnates somebody, and then the kid comes looking for her later. Which is very, 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 very cool plot point, the way it's handled in the story. So I would be here for this. I think I would be here for this in general. I think family dynamic like that would make for a really, really interesting book, period, Kris.
And I think, we could even bring into the fold his adopted family, Margali Zardos, and the entire, Roma aspect of it and the sorcery behind it. So bring his adopted family into the mix as well. So I'm all the way here for that. All right, Dave. as a recent convert to a Dick Grayson superfan, and I am ravenously reading anything and everything that man is involved in, please share with me your last pitch.
My last pitch, obviously, as you can imagine, would be another sort of Elseworlds tale, as the DC fans like to call them. Not something that would happen in main continuity. But I've always been really interested in a world where Dick Grayson doesn't become Nightwing. You know? So imagine you have a situation where, Dick Grayson is Robin, and then he has that falling out with Batman. But instead of like adopting the Nightwing persona and going off and becoming, his own man, his own hero, he just retires. He's done. He goes, he meets a nice girl, starts a family, and has a normal life. And then one day, he turns on the news and they found Batman dead in an alley. Just shot, just like his parents all those years ago. He's just dead in an alley. Everybody now knows he's was Bruce Wayne. The body was found, examined and everything. And Dick Grayson, who has not had any major contact with Bruce in years, because of their falling out, is overcome with grief and with regret about how they left things, and that his father's now dead.
Oh.
And so he does sort of the unthinkable, which is he goes in his basement, he digs out the old Robin suit, he puts it back on, and Robin returns. And as a fully grown man, not as Nightwing, but as Robin, he returns to the Batcave. He gets the equipment that he can. The Batcave's been discovered. There's all these people like combing through all of Bruce Wayne's stuff, the police tape everywhere. He gets what he can. And he starts investigating the murder of his adoptive father, and he tries to figure out what happened. Was this just, how does some dude with a gun just get the drop on Batman? Like there's got to be something else going on here. And so we got once again the detective story, and we have a guy who's been retired for years, coming back out of retirement one last time, putting on that Robin suit and trying to figure out what happened to his dad. At the same time, he has his wife and kid at home, and how is he going to deal with that? How can he justify to his wife that he's out there playing Robin again, when he has responsibilities at home? And what happens to his family if he gets shot in some alley? And so there's plenty of internal conflict there, as Dick Grayson has to come to terms with his relationship with his father and what happened in the past, and try to make peace with that, and at the same time figure out, ultimately who killed Batman. I think that would be a really, really fun story.
I mean, this has all the aspects that is it's almost like it was like an a la carte menu that I ordered from, and I absolutely love the idea, and now I want it.
And you can have it for the low, low price of DC hiring me. All right, Kris. Final pitch. This one has me really intrigued. I think I'm all here for this.
Oh my god. So this was... I had the two solid ideas, and then I just went off the rails with this third one, and I just threw at the wall, and we'll see if it sticks. One of my all-time favorite franchises is no secret. I love the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And my other true love is the X-Men. Both mutants by name, but they've never really interacted. And that's a shame, because the TMNT crossover with so many franchises that I love. The TMNT Power Rangers is one of my favorite crossovers I've ever read. I have mad love for the Batman TMNT crossovers. Particularly the third one. The third one is absolutely crazy, and I think it's my favorite of the bunch, and maybe that's where I'm going with this. But my third and final pitch is TMNT X-Men Mutant Madness in Murder World. After years of successfully absconding amongst the sewers of New York, the Turtles are at last discovered by Arcade, master of Murder World, and sent to his domain to hold their own alongside the other set of merry mutants, the X-Men. And I think there's just so many fantastic character beats. No matter which cast of X-Men that you want to include in this, I immediately want to see the interactions, the gruff off, the brood off between Wolverine and Raphael. I want to see who can be the more prototypical leader between Leonardo and Cyclops, and two of my new favorite characters in both respective properties. I mean, I love both of these families of characters so much, and I just want them to interact. And I think Arcade is a crazy enough villain to just make it happen. Um, I just want them to interact with one another, and I think the storytelling possibilities are endless. So yes, it's another TMNT crossover, but it's mutants. How do we not make this happen? Sign the checks, make it happen. Mutant madness in Murder World.
Yeah, this one's got me fascinated, dude. Like, you're right. It would be. It's interesting. Like, what version of the X-Men, which of the X-Men are you going to throw in this, and what status quo do you want to use for this? Is it like that darn school, as you like to say, or is it the Krakoa era? Like there are so many different ways that you could go with this that I find extremely interesting. So yeah, I'm totally here for this.
I think just off the top of my head, there's been like a real return to form with nostalgia, and I know that I'm typically the one raging against the nostalgia, but we've had X-Men Legends recently that kind of go back into the 90s and tell these apocryphal stories. And then we also have like the X-Men 92 franchise. So I think you just lean into the 90s nostalgia of it all and go into like the X-Men TAS cast. I think that would be fascinating, as they're doing with the X-Men 92. I think they're even doing like House of X 92 right now in the comics, and they're having like, what if Krakoa happened in the 90s with that cast of characters? So that's fascinating. And if we can go back to the 90s for that, like there was no other time in history that the Turtles were more prevalent than in the 90s. So let's make it happen, y'all.
I'm here for it, man. I really am.
All right, that wraps up our Byword Big Talk. What are your reactions to our pitches, and what comic books do you want to see? Hit us up on social media, Twitter and Instagram, at Nerd Byword, or individually, That Nerd Dave and That Nerd Kris. When we come back, we've got 2 more Nerd Commendations, and there's more dick in this one. All right, we are back for this week's final segment. We're coming at you with more Dave, what you got for us this week?
A qualified nerd commendation with great regrets, because this book is so good and yet it has never been finished. So I'd like to talk for a moment about Morning Glories. Morning Glories is an Image comic book series. It's written by our old friend Nick Spencer. Only this one is, I think, probably some of his absolute best work. He's described the book as Runaways meets Lost. And the book is basically about 6 brilliant but troubled teenagers who are recruited to attend a prestigious prep school, Morning Glory Academy, which is actually hiding some pretty sinister secrets and directly involved in some pretty evil schemes. And I think the Lost comparison is incredibly apt here. The book also features art by Joe Eisma, and his art is so clean, is I can think the best way to put it. It is incredibly streamlined and beautiful, and it really just pops off the page. Eisma has an ability to make every single character, whether that is a main character or just a side character, incredibly distinctive. Just a very, very great talent for just creating distinctive faces. You never have this problem with this book, which has a pretty sprawling cast of looking at 2 characters and saying, oh, they look too similar, I can't tell them apart. This does not happen with Eisma's artwork. Now, the Lost comparison is perfect because it is a very much a a wheels within wheels kind of story featuring flashbacks and flash forwards, and individual character history slowly unfold, and you get to see through flashbacks how their past informs their present, and the characters are all fascinating and interesting. Like I said, this is, I think, Spencer's best work by far. Here's the problem that makes this so depressing. The series ran for 50 issues in 2 cycles of I think 25 issues, being labeled as a season 1 and as a season 2. Regrettably, season 2 wrapped up on a cliffhanger several years ago now, and no season 3 is in sight. So I don't know if the numbers weren't there to justify continuing publication into a 3rd season or what, but this story is unfinished. I'm hoping that eventually Spencer gets a chance to come back to this and create a 3rd and final season to kind of wrap everything up. There are so many cool concepts in here. There's, all sorts of sci-fi frameworks, time travel is involved. It is just such an interesting book, and I think it's so regrettable that currently it remains unfinished. Even in its unfinished form, however, collected across 10 trade paperbacks, I think it is absolutely worth the price of admission. I think absolutely everybody should read this, especially if you have kind of ambivalent feelings about like Spencer's Spider-Man run, for example. I think this is his finest work, especially his character work on this book is absolutely just spot on. It's beautifully written, beautiful art. I hate reading things that are not finished, or even watching TV shows that were canceled on a cliffhanger. But there is something about this series that just drew me in, and I think it's totally worth still checking out today, Kris.
So I'm fascinated by this because if there is one publisher of comic books that I have read next to nothing for, it's Image Comics. The entire kind of edgelord, like rebellious nature of Image in the 90s was kind of off-putting to me. None of those initial books at Image are interesting in the least. Walking Dead is not my ministry. Invincible I've read a little bit of, as we just mentioned, but so I have not read a lot of Image stuff. When it comes to indie, I'm almost exclusively Boom or IDW. But I have not read a lot of Image, but I think this might be, my gateway, because I'm looking at the art alone and I'm fascinated by it. I'm right there with you. When I have certain artists that have the same face for every character. Looking at you, J. Scott Campbell, it is incredibly frustrating. So I'm here for the art alone. I had high hopes for the Spencer run. It's been on ASM. It's been heavily detailed on this show ad nauseum at this point. I think something as fascinating as his Captain America run, Steve Rogers, and the way that Secret Empire played out was really, really, really interesting and intriguing to me, especially given the political landscape at the time in which that was written. And then, the ASM run started with such promise, and I was such a defender for such a long time, and then for it to end as it did was extremely disappointing. But I don't know. Do I want to set myself up for disappointment and start reading this? But I think I might.
Well, I'm excited that you're interested in diving into this, because I think it's totally a worthy read, even in its unfinished form. Let's go ahead and dive into your nerd commendation for this week, one that I find very interesting as well.
So, as I said last week, I'm head over heels in love with the character of Dick Grayson, based on how much I've enjoyed Gotham Knights, how much I relate to the character, and so I immediately purchased a subscription of DC Universe Infinite, the Ultra, and I'm reading anything and everything Dick Grayson, and that includes Nightwing Rebirth, and so I am reading all of it, written by Tim Seeley, tag teaming on art Javier Fernandez and Marcus Toe, who I enjoyed in his work in Excalibur, so it's cool to see him on art. And I'm really digging it. I know that you're telling me to expect disappointment in the the further I get into this, but the Better Than Batman arc with Raptor, I greatly enjoyed. I enjoyed diving into his backstory and his history, and seeing. It's always great to see an adversary kind of play both sides of the fence and make some really good points. So I really enjoyed the character of Raptor. And then the Back to Bloodhaven arc was really, really cool. I love the romance between himself and Defacer. And then the Nightwing plus Must Die arc that I'm currently in is really, really great. As someone who greatly enjoys Damian Wayne, seeing him back together again with Damian teaming up. It also made me check out your Batman and Robin recommendation by Morrison and Quietly, which I'm just ravenously enjoying. And I'm sure to be a future Nerd Commendation soon and very soon. But everything I'm reading right now with Nightwing Rebirth, I know you tell me it falls off until Taylor picks it up again, but I'm liking what I read so far.
I'm really excited to see you getting into like the Dick Grayson story arcs. Rebirth Nightwing was really good for quite a while. Then there was a creative team shift. Then there was a very questionable decision done to the character that really derailed, I think, everything, as you mentioned, until Taylor picks it back up. And I think the current run is quite good again. I'll also say that that past runs on Nightwing were quite good. I know you're not, you know, like I have some ambivalent feelings about Chuck Dixon. But when you get into that 90s era, Nightwing, Robin, a huge chunk of Batman were all written by Dixon. And so that initial run where Nightwing got a couple of miniseries and then his first solo book, those were really good. The same thing really goes for Tim Drake's Robin. His solo book was really good as well there for a long time. In fact, that's where Stephanie Brown was first introduced. So I know it's sometimes difficult to go back to that, especially given Dixon's current attitudes. But there is a lot of really good Nightwing content out there if you're willing to go backwards a little bit as well. Once you sync up with the current book, I think you'll really enjoy this as well. There's some really cool stuff happening there. Just Nightwing is a great character, and the more Nightwing, the better, if you ask me.
All right, that wraps up another episode, 133, it's hard to believe, of the Nerd Byword podcast. We thank you for rolling along with us. You can find us on every podcast platform, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, or nerdbyword.com.
And find us on social media. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Nerd Byword, and individually at That Nerd Dave and at That Nerd Kris. Also want to just go ahead and throw out there that you can currently find me also on Mastodon on the .art server. And I'm also playing around a little bit with another app called Hive. So I'm deeply exploring social media right now, given some of the atmosphere happening on Twitter. And you might see my buddy Kris there also diversifying his portfolio a little bit. So feel free to find That Nerd Dave on Hive and on Mastodon.art as well.
Yeah, and I've been a big fan of Hive so far. Mastodon, not so much. Sorry, Lex. I don't see it for it. But as of the time of recording, I think Hive shut down their servers for security purposes. So as I understand it, there's only 2 folks running the thing. They're also looking to grow as a company and hire some new folks. So I like what I saw of Hive before they shut things down. Hopefully, fingers crossed, they can get it back up and running. But I really, really enjoyed Hive and hope that we continue to follow them continuing into the future. But as it stands, you can also hit those social links in our bio, the link tree. You can also slide into our Discord server for some cool shenanigans. You can nerd out with us, share your own nerd commendations. You can also find our merch stores. And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, 2 nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez with additional drops composed by Joe Biondi. Our show art is by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.